Chapter Spooks.
G'day, and welcome to Chapter Spooks, where we talk about the books that keep your kids up at night. I'm your podcast host, Matthew A.J. Anderson, a horror author, narratologist, word nerd, and secret skeleton. And today we are covering the next book in the CreepTown series, The Bone Taker. Now before we get into it, I think I said in the last episode that this should be shorter because the book's shorter, but I was actually mixing this book up with the next book in the series, which brings me to my first point I want to bring up, which is, please number your dang books. Right? Now, I recognize that if you're an author, you don't necessarily have control over that, especially in traditional publishing. Often the publisher will decide that for you. And if it's some kind of a horror imprint, I recognize that not every book actually follows on. There's different authors, that makes sense. But first of all, the publisher of these books is Yellow Morning Press. And after a bit of research, I found out that Yellow Morning Press appears to be Scott Charles, the author of these books. So you're an independent author, means you had control of this. Number your damn books. Because my second point is, if you're a book collector like me, then you want to know easily whether you've got all the books in your series. And for a Chapter Spook series like this, which is a series of several books in order, you need to number them so I know what I'm doing. I've actually bought a white gel tip pen for the occasions when books fail to have a number, just so I number them myself, but I shouldn't have to do that. And the number of times I have just in my own Chapter Spooks bookshelf is ridiculous. But that being said, and that rant out of the way, I was actually really looking forward to this book, The Bone Taker, because my major issue with the last book, besides the word count, and this book also has issues with word count that I'm not going to reiterate here, but it was the tone. It was struggling with the tone because this author seems to really excel when it comes to comedy writing. They're really sort of a jokey, kiddie author, which is fine. That's a perfectly fine book. It's not really what I'm looking for in Chapter Spooks, but with Bones, to me, that's sort of a less horrific, like, it makes me think, spooky, scary skeletons. Like, the whole idea is that it's spooky, but it's kind of silly at the same time. And I feel like that suits the tone better than the last book, which was all about, like, literal blood and eyeballs and guts and bugs. So I thought this was already starting off with the tone on the right foot, starting with this author's strengths. And when I got into the book, it seemed to be doing that pretty well, even though it kept dipping into really silly things that I wasn't the biggest fan of, but that's a personal quirk. I don't really like books that get silly like this. But the tone felt better, and I was wondering, is this book actually that much better than the last book because of that? Like, is it just that I was expecting the tone to be silly, that I preferred it? But then I kept reading, and by the halfway point of this book, I had soured so much on the stupid tone that I can say I officially hate both of these books. Yay, consistency. So to show you why I hate this book so much, I'm going to have to take you through it. So let us get into the summary of CreepTown number 2, The Bone Taker. Now, for Chapter 1, this book, just like the last book, starts in medias res, and I honestly rolled my eyes when I saw it, because I'm thinking, is this just something that this author does for every book? I guess we'll find out in the next book. But honestly, this started off a lot better than the last book did, like I said, with the whole tone thing, so I'm going to let it introduce itself in its own words. This is the opening chapter of The Bone Taker. When my friend Darius found the missing C-Rex skeleton that half the town was searching for, at first I didn't believe him. No way could he find it. No way. How could a 12-year-old kid find a missing museum exhibit that not even my Uncle Leo could find? The museum staff has been searching all afternoon for that, I told him. I think Uncle Leo would have noticed a 40-foot skeleton reappearing. Maybe, I thought privately. I'll prove it, Darius insisted. Follow me. He nodded to the very back of the museum hall. One of the corridors. My heart shivered. Where were we exactly? Would you believe me if I said we were on a class trip to the Museum of Natural History? Not the real one in New York City. This was my Uncle Leo's version. Kind of. The museum building was brand new, and there was a thrilling mystery attached to it. Basically, nobody knew who had built it, who had paid for it, or who in their right mind had looked at all the job applications flooding in from Harvard and Stanford and Duke and said, "Ah yes, the D+ student from Cretaceous College, class of 2002, that's the person I must put in charge." But all of it really happened. Like Cinderella when she married the prince, Uncle Leo left his job scrubbing dishes at Wexley's and became executive director of the Museum of Natural History. freaky, huge place full of paintings and statues and long, bendy corridors that never seemed to lead to the room you expected, like in Harry Potter or something. Hogwarts, my teacher had called it. On Friday morning for our class trip, we'll be visiting the closest thing to a real Hogwarts castle. Was it true? Was Miss Wellington right? In a minute, I'll let you judge for yourself. Come on, Darius hissed. That corridor could disappear any second. We've got to go now. I puffed out of breath. My eyes slid to Mrs. Fawcett, our chaperone. Was she watching us? No, her famous death glare was fixed on a Greek statue in the corner. I think the naked body offended her. Everything offends Mrs. Fawcett. Hurry, Arlo, before the old bag turns around. Okay, fine. Darius and I pretended to walk toward the restrooms, then swerved down a corridor that seemed to grow bigger as soon as we entered it. I took slow, careful steps instead of speed walking. Don't squish, I begged my ankles. Don't wrinkle. Don't flop. Darius raced out ahead of me. I watched his book bag straps whip around the bend, heading God knows where. Darius, I called nervously. Darius! I shuffled after him, squishing and flopping. My heart pounded. Did I mention how eerie these corridors were? Do you know about the slime dripping down, the space black windows, the weird bloody light? How about my legs? The missing bones in my legs? I let out a long, wheezy breath as I finally emerged at the other end of the corridor. I blinked my eyes, peering round. The new room was totally strange. No ceiling, no walls, just a wide open space filled with fog. Fog and bones. About 10 seconds later, I found the missing C-Rex skeleton. It opened its jawbone and lunged at me. Now, come on, that's a great introduction to the story, and also, it's got a rather silly tone, so you've already got that mood set. I mean, the only things I don't like about it are, firstly, the reference to Harry Potter. That's not really a storyline issue, though. That's more of a human decency issue, to which I'll simply say, trans rights are human rights. But this is a pretty engaging introduction, and it leads into the next chapter, which then rewinds to the start of this day to find out how we got there. And so we start by learning about our main character, Arlo Vreeland. And his main facet, as was somewhat mentioned in that first chapter, is that he is missing 30 to 40% of his bones. Now, that's an interesting idea. I thought that'd be really creepy to have a main character who struggles to deal with the fact that they have this medical condition. But this book, now, I'm willing to accept the way it portrays the missing bones because it already has a silly tone, and as we later learn, this is caused by a curse. But it implies that a lack of bones means that you can squish and move your body around like silly putty. You can sort of stretch and squish. And also, he says that when he's walking, because he's missing bones in his legs, he has to concentrate to keep his legs rigid, even though that's not how bones work. That's not how biology works. That's not how anything works. You can't focus your legs into having bones. Of course, the story I was hoping for about a character who needs to have braces on their legs to make sure they can actually walk is probably a little darker than the tone this book was going for, and like I said, it's explained by magic later on, so I'm willing to accept this explanation for the lack of bones thing. We also learn in the first chapter that, once again, our author doesn't know how to murder his darlings, because there are way too many subplots. Because our kid says that his class is going to the museum that afternoon, but also we learn that the museum is run by Leo Vreeland, which is Arlo's uncle, and Leo is his dad's younger brother, because his dad, often called Dr. Fossil because he's a paleontologist, really wishes he had that job because he's more suited to it, but he didn't get the job, and so he's just sort of disgusted at the way that his brother runs it, as sort of like a theme park sort of a thing. And that's what that C-Rex is that was mentioned in the first chapter. The C-Rex is the Creeposaurus Rex. It's a dinosaur discovered by Leo. Now, you can't see the square quotes there because obviously the Creeposaurus Rex is just a Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton that's been put together wrong, because it's got giant teeth and it's got like huge plates on its back that come from another dinosaur and like an ankylosaur's tail. It's clearly just a mixed up set of bones, but Leo's using it as like a big, this is the mascot of our museum exhibits, like come see our amazing museum with the Creeposaurus Rex. And also when Arlo gets an invitation to go to the museum that day, it's etched into a fossil. Like, that is crazy. Like, I was willing to ignore it because that's ridiculous, but even his dad's like, what the hell? He's so disrespectful, etching invitations into fossils. Do you know how rare these things are? So he gets his son to get some packets so he can check out the bones to see whether or not they're made together properly, because he knows they're not. Like I said, an extra subplot, because the other plot is that we learn that Arlo is planning on filming a movie at the museum whilst the class goes to it on their class trip. And when he leaves to go to school, he meets up with Darius, his friend, and we learn that Darius He has two main traits. One of them is that his voice sounds like, and I quote, like a bullfrog. That's why I was sort of before. And the second thing is that he is obsessed with movies. He wants to be a director. He wants to be the next Spielberg. And I kind of like the way it works for the story, that he also, just like Arlo, they're both picked on at school. They're both bullied by another kid called Craig Stetler, who we'll see in just a moment. But when he's filming, he gets into director mode, and he suddenly has bravery because he's like, he just got to get that shot. And it actually helps move the story forward in some points. But then the other subplot is that Arlo and Kayla used to be close friends when they were really little kids. I'm talking like 4 and 5 years old. And so Darius wants Arlo to ask Kayla to be in their movie, but Arlo doesn't want to, not only because they haven't been friends for a long time, but also he has a massive crush on her because she's like this really cute girl. And they also learn that day that she's hanging out with the guy that bullies them, Craig. And if all this sounds confusing, it is. But the only thing you need to know is that Arlo's missing his bones, and he's going to the museum, and he and Kayla used to be friends, but he has a crush on her now, and they're not close anymore. That's all that matters for the story. So they get to school, and the teacher, Miss Wellington, says, "Oh, I've got bad news." And then rather than tell them, she brings them into the classroom where she has some sort of a projector up that's projecting a news article that's talking about the fact that the Creeposaurus Rex skeleton was stolen, like it's gone missing. And the only reason I can think of why the book does this is because the author can actually write out the article, and he ends it with a stupid joke about, oh, and now here's a bunch of unblockable ads. Like, I don't really see the point of that. But what matters is Miss Wellington says, oh, I don't know if we can go to the museum anymore. Oh, that's a shame. And then the next chapter, like 3 sentences later, oh, she gets a phone call. Oh, and we can't go to the museum because the police have cordoned off the area we can't go to, so it's fine, I guess. So, Arlo's class, Miss Wellington, they go to the front, they all line up, and then Mrs. Fawcett, who I think they say she's a chaperone. I don't think she's actually a teacher, because they don't actually say she's a teacher, but Mrs. Fawcett then demands everyone show her their permission slips, and everyone but Arlo has one. And I don't know why he didn't bring the fossil out of his bag, because like that was inviting him, but apparently he never got a permission slip because he was invited by his uncle, and it's his uncle's museum, so even Miss Wellington said, well, you don't need a permission slip because we're going because of your uncle. But Mrs. Fawcett insists and says, no, you don't have a permission slip, you're not going. So there's a stupid scene for like a chapter and a half where Arlo gets sent to some kid's gym class, and he's in there for only a moment until he starts doing pull-ups, and then his arms stretch because apparently they're made of rubber when you're boneless. But anyway, the point is, his arms stretch, and the teacher goes, oh, where are your bones? Go to the nurse's office, there's something wrong. And so that manages to get him out of that class, I guess. Wouldn't the teachers know that he has a medical condition? Anyway, what matters is that he escapes it so quickly that the kids still haven't gotten on the bus. They're just putting all of their bags underneath the bus. And as they're shoving them in, someone says, oh, wow, that's shoved in there tight. You'd have to be boneless to get in there. Which, as a setup for a joke, is bad enough. But the fact that they have someone in their class who is boneless just seems needlessly cruel. So when everyone gets on the bus, Arlo jumps into the bottom bit with all the luggage and like silly putties himself around into the gaps and manages to ride to the museum that way. But then, I have to say this because honestly it really annoys me. It says that it's struggling to breathe in there because, you know, it's not open to the air, and he finds some pipe that he breathes through, but it turns out that that pipe leads to the bus's bathroom, and Mrs. Fawcett, who apparently has some kind of IBS, she goes running to the bathroom, and then the book describes that she goes to the bathroom with onomatopoeia, and I quote, and out came a sound like Mount St. Helens, an active volcano erupting, blurger. Now, I hate this for 2 reasons. First of all, that onomatopoeia is not what either a volcano or pooping sounds like, but more importantly, I recognize Mrs. Fawcett is meant to be a character that we're not supposed to like because she's getting in the way of the characters doing stuff. She's the chaperone who's really strict. And the book's way of punishing her is by pointing out that she has this irritable bowel syndrome of some kind. And my issue with that is that I see that as incredibly cruel and not something you should be teaching kids to laugh at, because there are people who do struggle with IBS and with issues like incontinence. It's actually an issue in culture and science called the poo taboo. When it comes to things to do with your digestion, people are embarrassed to talk about it because they feel this shame. And that's why the 3rd biggest killer when it comes to cancers is colorectal cancer. Because even though we have so many cures for cancers, people aren't willing to be the researchers who do the poo cancer research and people don't want to tell their doctor that they have problems going to the bathroom. It's a huge issue, and so this book just making fun of someone because they struggle when it comes to going to the bathroom, because they're a character who deserves it, I think is reprehensible. And yeah, I don't find poo funny, but I understand that scatological humor is something kids enjoy. That's fine. My issue is the fact that they're using someone's digestive medical condition for comedy, and that is not okay. But then they get to the museum, and when they get there, the bus crashes into a statue of Creeposaurus Rex. And the reason our main character describes it so well is because they crash so horrendously that they total the bus and it flings open the luggage container, and he goes rolling out and goes rolling into the debris of the statue, which turns out to be spaghetti, because I guess that's funny. And then, as the kids are about to go into the museum, I guess Mrs. Fawcett forgot that she banned Arlo from coming, because she never once mentions that he shouldn't be there, but whatever. As they're about to go into the museum, there's a chapter scare where there's a loud roaring sound. It's like, oh, what's causing that? And it's dozens and dozens of police bursting through the museum doors and escaping the museum. And I hate this, not because it's that bad. I mean, I could sort of understand like a stampede of people can sound like that, but this book several dozen times will have a chapter scale where it's like, oh, and then something happened, roar, and it spells out the onomatopoeia because that's something this author is obsessed with, misspelling onomatopoeia. But that's not the sound that police make, and that's not a sound that most of the things that go raw in this story make. It's just lazy. But thankfully, even though this is starting to reach the limits of how much stupid I was willing to put up with, we actually get to an interesting part of this story. Because they head in, and Arlo moves a little slower, because, you know, he doesn't have bones in his legs. And as he's lagging behind, he gets attacked by a suit of armor. Now, that was pretty stupid, but as he fights it, he manages to pull it off its feet after a bit of an action sequence by grabbing a bone inside of the leg and wrenching it free. And when he drops it, it slithers away like a snake. And I like that we're getting hints at this whole bone taker thing, like what exactly is the magic behind this. And when he tries to tell his class that he was attacked by a suit of armor, they all basically ignore him because he's Arlo the weird boneless freak. Like, nobody pays attention to him. They assume he's just doing it for attention. And also, like, when they get to the Creeposaurus' site where it's supposed to be, obviously it's empty, but they read the plaque and it's very poorly written. It just says, you know, height tall, weight heavy, but it also says diet ossivorous. And I like that our kid just says, hey Siri, what does that mean? And it explains ossivorous means bone eating or given to chewing on bones. So we're getting this hint at, okay, maybe that's the reason why these bones have gone missing. But this is where we find out how exactly our kids were planning on filming in the museum, because basically Arlo just ducks under the police tape that's around this crime scene, and he starts walking around saying stupid things like, oh, this isn't where I parked my car, and oh, this is bad. It's super bad. And they both admit that this is terrible, but they're like, oh, it's fine, we'll fix it in post. But as they're messing around and filming, there's a crash from the ceiling, and another dinosaur, like I think they say it's a brontosaurus, falls down and it smashes onto the ground there. And everyone's freaking out, and Arlo's like, oh, it's because the bones are alive, ah! But nobody believes him, especially when some rats also go skittering away, and they assume that rats have been chewing through the bones. And the first time ever in this book, someone acts smart, because Mrs. Fawcett says, this place is clearly a death trap. If the exhibits are collapsing onto people, we need to get out of here. So they head to the front entrance. But despite the fact that the police just ran through there, the front entrance is locked, and Mrs. Fawcett, again, smartest person in the room, says, that is a fire hazard, this is ridiculous, but either way, we need to get out of here some way, and if we can't go this way, we have to go another way. So Miss Wellington and Mrs. Fawcett decide they will go deeper into the museum to find some other way out. Oh, and also at some point, I guess they mentioned that the power goes out, or maybe it was always out, I don't know. I couldn't find the exact quote, but the point is, the power's out, so kids are basically going through using the flashlight apps on their phones to see where they're going. And now apparently this museum is very poorly designed, because it has no maps, and also when they finally find some like signposts with arrows pointing where to go, they reach up to try to see what it says, and the thing spins loosely on its pole, and they realize that all the arrows are completely useless, so they just randomly pick a direction. But finally we get some plot, because Arlo notices that Kayla, alongside Craig, because they're working together apparently, sneak off in behind some random corridor whilst the rest of the class is distracted. And he thinks about following them, but, you know, he's a little bit of a coward, and he's not really sure if he wants to go towards Craig, So he keeps with the class as they go through some more silly side things, like they find some paintings and it's like, oh, why are they hidden? It's like, oh, because they don't bring in guests like museum exhibits. And they also find a pile of bones hidden behind the paintings and like the wall. Also, it's not very interesting. What matters is finally, more plot, we get to the actual dinosaur exhibit called the Jurassic Pagoda. They're looking at all the different dinosaur skeletons, and as we're looking at all these things, I like the description because Arlo says that they remind him of Jenga, but Jenga, like if you're playing that, block pulling puzzle, like near the end of the game where there's a lot of holes in it, and he counts the different bones because, his dad being Dr. Fossil and a paleontologist, he knows a fair bit about dinosaurs, and he notices that all of the dinosaurs look like they're about to teeter over because they are also missing 30 to 40% of their bones. And so apparently the teachers decide to use this as a learning experience because they get the kids to try to draw sketches and find out how well the dinosaurs are put together or not put together. And so Darius finds this really boring, and so he encourages Arlo to follow him as they go film some stuff. So they go walking through the dark corridors, and Arlo is looking around and trying to be all like, oh, that's an Eoraptor. And because his dad's a paleontologist, he actually knows some of the cool terms, and so they get some good footage of him wandering, until they come across what is described as a river of bones. Now, we later learn that this river of bones, there actually is a river of bones later, so it's annoying that they call this that. It's more like if you see a line of ants heading towards their nest, but these bones are like clicking and clacking and rolling along and like going up the walls. So that's more like a chain of bones. And like I said, would be better because they're about to go to the river of bones because they follow it. Oh, and also, I have to mention this because it's another example of this book being stupid. Darius is implied to be incredibly dumb because he says, oh wow, it's like rats. It must be rats carrying the bones because they're following the smell so that they can bring it to their queen, because he's confusing rats for ants. If I dwell on every single stupid joke, we're going to be here all day. So they follow the bones as they lead towards a big hole in the wall which has an actual river of bones. And the way that they're flowing is that the bones have some sort of a slime on them which helps them move. Now, the book never describes what this looks like, it just says it is slime, and so I assumed that it was clear, sort of like saliva, and that's also kind of creepier, I suppose. But honestly, this is not a visual medium, dude. You have to describe what color the slime is. But anyway, as they're looking at this stuff and Darius is filming, like he's in director mode, he doesn't realize that he's leaning too far into the wall, he falls into the river of bones and starts crying out for help as he sweeps through. And I like that Arlo feels brave all of a sudden because he's like, no, I need to save my friend. And so he dives into the river and swims after Darius. And apparently, because he's half boneless, and I think it's later mentioned that maybe the bones slightly move away from him because of his bonelessness, he manages to swim very easily through the bones, just like water. And so he grabs onto his friend, and there's an action moment where I think a giant skull's tumbling towards him as well. But he manages to pull him, and they dive out of the way into some other cavern which is lit by torches. And I do kind of like the atmosphere here because Darius, as a costume for Arlo's character, his character is basically just Dr. Arlo, and he's even given him this silly plastic Akubra, sort of like an Indiana Jones hat. But they look around this torchlit room, and they're looking around at the strange symbols written on the wall. They're like hieroglyphics, they're in a strange language they can't read. But then, written under them in English, because this is a museum, it says, "Here lies the sorcerer's tomb, only the panicked shall pass." And then they see that there's two doorways in the wall, one of them called the Heart Gate and the other called the Bone Gate. But in the Heart Gate, there's some sort of glowing red stone, some sort of glowing red thing that seems to be in the gate. And this is where I was getting excited because I'm like, okay, so obviously Bone Gate, Heart Gate, there's something to do with this curse. And as the kids are thinking about checking these out, they get distracted when they hear this sound behind them, which, it's a creepy scene because all these tiny Creeposaurus skeleton monsters start attacking them, really small ones. But for some reason, the onomatopoeia that the author chose for these is queek, queek. Dude, you were so obsessed with putting fake roars throughout the book. Couldn't you make them roar a little bit? But these monsters start advancing on them and they're attacking, but just as these kids are getting backed into the corner, they don't know what to do, they get saved by Craig Stetler. Their bully comes running through and he's like, Stetler smash, and he just starts stomping the bones. And then they see Kayla alongside Craig, and she's swinging and jumping around like an acrobat. She looks incredible. In fact, even our main character admits that she'd make a better Indiana Jones than him because that is so cool. So they come in like big damn heroes, they smash the bones, and they clear them away, and they're looking at the two kids, and Kayla looks Arlo in the eyes, and he feels a flutter of his heart as she looks him in the eye and says, "Arlo, you idiot, why do you always have to follow me?" And she's basically talking around Arlo because she's doing her own mission and she's got her own story going on, which doesn't involve them. But just through her talking with Craig, they realize that she's been looking for the Bone Gate, and apparently Craig didn't realize that the Bone Gate was right next to the Heart Gate because it had cobwebs and he was scared of it. But they finally find it, and she says, okay, we need to find some bone to put there. And showing just how desperate Kayla is for this, she tries ramming her arm in there and says, look, take it, just take it, damn it, you stupid gate. But after a moment, Arlo gets an idea, and he pulls out the fossil in his bag, the one that has the invitation to come to the museum etched into it. And when he shows it to Kayla, she says, oh, why didn't I think of that myself? And she pulls out from her own bag another fossil that has an invitation etched into it for her. And so we realize that these bone fossil invitations weren't written by Leo, so Dr. Fossil. Thankfully his brother wasn't that stupid. They were etched by the sorcerer, at least that's what Kayla says. And I do like that just before she puts the bone in the gate, Arlo says to her, what is going on? Like, why are you going in through here? And she says, you really don't remember, do you? And that's when she puts the bone in, and it unlocks this portal. It looks like it goes to some other world or something. And so she dives through the portal. And as she does, the portal starts closing, but then the entire room starts closing in, and they realize it's because there is this huge wave of bones that's collapsing in on them. And so Craig lets go of them, and he shoves them, and he says, quick, run, save yourselves, you dive through the bones. And then he dives through the Bone Gate portal just after Kayla, just before it closes, and our two main characters are running away in the other direction, just getting away from these collapsing bones, and they only just manage to save themselves. Now, this is all getting pretty action-packed. I thought it was kind of cool, and in fact, the next few scenes are the kids running through, and they actually have an Indiana Jones boulder, but the boulder is like made of bones following them. But it turns out it's like actually a bone egg, and it cracks open, and it's a Creeptosaurus skull. But the reason why I'm fast forwarding through all this is because I don't want you thinking that this book is incredible, amazing, because it is about to get really, really bad. And literally, it's the halfway point of this book where our kids, I think they dive through into another bone river, and they manage to swim through this thing, and they dive out at the last second, falling flat on their faces into a room where the rest of their class is. And Arlo looks up and he sees his dad. And so it turns out that for some convoluted reason, Leo called his brother in to come and help because there was some issue with the museum, I suppose. And so he came in with like projector and slides and this talk he was going to give at work, but instead he's giving it to the students to, I guess, educate them. Although that's not the real reason he's giving the talk. The real reason he's giving this talk is because this is the exposition section. Because even though I was sort of getting intrigued by the revelations, what was going on, instead we have to sit down and have the plot explained to us. So, Dr. Fossil explains that this museum used to be a dig site. In fact, there was a whole paleontological dig that he led, and that's where they found most of the bones that are in the museum. And in fact, one of the reasons he's so upset about the museum is that he's sure there's more bones in the dig site before they built this museum on top of it, even though nobody knows who built it. Oh, and he also mentions the history of the Sorcerer's Tomb. Obviously, he doesn't believe it because he's a paleontologist, but he mentions that there was the Sorcerer's Tomb, and there was apparently some curse called Classum. And whilst he says it's all fake nonsense, because of course he would, he's a scientist, but it's very obvious that Classum, the curse, must be this thing that's taking Arlo's bones. And then he actually shows a slide of his kid, Arlo, with Kayla at the dig site. And yeah, there was some reference earlier how Arlo was like, oh, hey, I have memories of a dig site. And it turns out that's the reason why, is because he actually was at this dig site. And then Dr. Fossil just admits, because it's plot relevant, that one of the reasons why he had to stop taking Arlo was because one day both Arlo and Kayla fell down a hole at the dig site, and they actually show a picture of them bringing up some giant heart-shaped ruby, which they dug up from inside, which, honestly, that makes no sense because later in the book it's shown that the ruby is still inside the museum, like actually in the Sorcerer's Tomb. So I don't know how they dug it up and then they put it back. But anyway, what matters is that he also mentions, oh, and I guess it was a really cool find, but it's not a really useful gem, so we just let Kayla take it home, and they made some necklaces from it. And apparently both Arlo and Kayla have necklaces, which, if that's coming out of nowhere for you, it came out of nowhere for me as well. I don't remember that happening earlier in the story, of them both having red necklaces. Okay, he's cursed because he fell down some hole with a giant heart thing. Okay, and then our kids are stuck there, and the only reason why they're doing all this stuff, even though they know for a fact that Kayla and Craig are missing, they say, oh, we can't leave because the supervisors are watching. And then they leave because the supervisors aren't watching closely enough. It's incredibly contrived. It's a very bad way to explain your plot. And to me, it's another example of, like, this book is so clogged with subplots and other silly things that it forgot to include the plot until halfway through the book. So the class goes wandering outwards, and they go passing some Greek statues, and they mention offhandedly that Mrs. Fawcett seems offended by one of them. And that's when I realized, oh wait, the Greek statue, that was mentioned in that earlier moment. So we must be getting back to that scene from In Medias Res, right? And we are, kind of. You know what, I'm going to let the book try to justify itself for you here. Before we go any further, I have to be honest. I've been dreading this chapter. But it's fine now. I think I finally know how to do it. You see, there's another game I like to play. No, it's not Jenga. The game is called Two Truths and a Lie, and I want to play it right now. I'm going to say 3 things about my book. 2 things are true, 1 is a lie. Can you guess the lie on my list? Number 1, a lot of scary stuff is about to happen right now. Number 2, all of it actually happened. It won't be made up. Number 3, the events in chapter 1 also happened. Tick, tick, tick. Got your answer? Okay, so it wasn't that tough. Number 3 is the lie. Kind of. Look, it's hard writing books. I'm in 6th grade. I don't always know what I'm doing. Sometimes I get overexcited, and yeah, I start making things up. I never lie about big things. I swear. It's just, I want people to read this. It's an important true story. It could happen to you. So when I started writing it, I was afraid people wouldn't believe me. Okay. You know what? There's a lesson here. And that lesson is, if you want to know exactly how to make your reader feel like you've slapped them in the face, do this. Why would you start your book in medias res, start in the middle of things with a scene that doesn't happen? You don't have to start your book like that. You've realized that, right? That's what I was saying in the last book. You didn't need to start in the middle of things because the start was already interesting enough. This book starts with a missing dinosaur skeleton. That's already a plot worthy of starting your book with. And yet throwing this stuff into the middle with all these scenes that I don't need for the story because they don't actually happen, why would you do that? And your excuse that writing is hard and you're a 6th grader? Yeah, but newsflash, the person who actually wrote this book isn't a 6th grader. So the fact that you're telling your first chapter and it's a lie and it doesn't actually help the story along and it's used to set the tone even though it's wrong because it doesn't happen, why would you do that? And you know the worst part? The worst part of all of this is that, yes, this is about 2/3 of the way through the book, and I hate this so much, but I could justify it. You could explain it if the plot you developed because of this was really good as a result. Like, I've had books do that to me. I've had books that I didn't like at the beginning, but then I realized that it was because they were building up to a certain twist. They needed to do that in order for the plot to work. That excuses it. That makes it worth it. But the original plot of chasing a giant Creeposaurus Rex skeleton is so much better than the plot we actually get because of this nonsense. So I'm not going to go for a play-by-play on this. I'm just going to go through what happens. Because, yeah, the kids escape. They go down into the tomb. And as they get in there, they use the necklace he has as the heart gate thing, and he uses his bone to get into the tomb, and he gets in, and it's this big thing that's full of bones, and then they see the knight again. Oh, it's that knight that attacked him. But the knight starts talking like a 3-year-old, being like, oh, doing the thing bad, big smashy boo. And it turns out that the sorcerer of the sorcerer's tomb is the quote-unquote defective child of his 2 parents that are actual sorcerers, and that's the reason why they think it's cursed, and he is controlling the bones. And we learn that Kayla this whole time has also been cursed, because even though our kid has been dealing with this loss of bones throughout his life, apparently Kayla's been losing her heart, because, you know, heart gate, bone gate, she's losing her heart, and that affected her hair, even though that could have been a really interesting plot point of her losing her emotions or something like that. But she wanted to fix this because it turns out that when they fell down the hole, oh, plot twist, he didn't actually fall down the hole, she fell down the hole and stopped herself because she grabbed onto a ledge, but he jumped in after her to save her. That's why she's like, oh, why do you keep following me? And so it actually turns out that she likes him after all. Oh, wow, you know, love thing. But her plan was to destroy the giant heart that was down there, even though we saw the picture of them bringing it up or whatever. And so she tells him to smash it, but he decides not to smash it because it turns out that even though the sorcerer is this child babbling, annoying nuisance. He's like, oh no, he's actually not a bad guy, and so instead he decides to fix the heart. But even though he's like, oh, I'm not going to smash it, and I don't know what to do, we get 4 chapters of him messing around, and the baby sorcerer teaching him how to control the bones for some reason. And then Kayla escapes from the thing, she tries to stop him, and he manages to finally put the broken pieces of it back together from the necklaces, which didn't exist at the start of the book, remember? He puts them in the thing, and it fixes it, and then the sorcerer he creates a holy city of bones or something under... Look, it's not interesting. Like, it turns out the whole Creeposaurus Rex thing was just him putting stuff together because he thought it looked cool, because he's a kid. And the reason why he hired Leo to be the director is because, like, the reason the museum is made of bones itself, because he used his magic to do it, even though his magic's like half effective. And he likes Leo because Leo's good with kids. So the story ends with Arlo fixing the thing. And also, apparently, because he's got magic, he fixes Arlo's bones. And he also fixes Kayla's hair, I guess. And this book ends... The book ends... I mean, we reveal that the sorcerer was some kid called Eric Stotts, who is in the book, apparently, but... So he goes to their school, and Mrs. Fawcett heads into the Bone Temple, and she's like, what are you kids doing down here? You're not allowed. We have to get out of here. And then she goes, uh-oh, where are the restrooms? And then, I wish I was kidding when I tell you... I mean, there's an epilogue after that says, oh, they filmed this all. But no, the ending of this book is that Mrs. Fawcett holds her stomach and says, where are the restrooms? Oh, no. And then she soils herself, and the smell is so bad that everyone, even the bone sorcerer, goes running out of there to avoid the horrible smell. That is how this book ends. What can I even say about this book? I mean, besides the fact that I don't think poop is funny, I don't think it's funny that someone with incontinence is the butt of a joke that ends the story. I don't think it makes any sense that this story had this interesting plot line with a kid losing his bones, and it turns out to just be some curse with this baby-talking sorcerer who is both 500 years old and 4 years old and 12 years old at the same time. So what's wrong with this story is all of the extra nonsense, all of the silly jokes and pointless subplots and silly puns and things that are thrown in top of this that make the book the longest book in the entire CreepTown series. This one is longer than the last book, and it's just because it's full of so much garbage. Like, when we understand the plot from the very middle, and I was like, oh, what's going on? This is exciting. Like, Kayla's got some secret that she's keeping from Arlo. What could this be? And then it turns out that instead of actually going on the adventure, we hit the brakes and the kids fall into a lesson being held by a paleontologist to explain the plot of the story. And the thing that is really bad, I didn't have too many quotes from this book because I don't enjoy the writing, because a lot of the time the way this book works is that it'll have a scene and it'll be like, oh, and then I did this, and then it'll stop and it'll say, oh, and you might be thinking, why would you do it like this? Why wouldn't you do that? You know, so it's stopping to meditate upon what it just said it did in the story. Like, there's an interesting moment, there's an action-packed moment where he's chasing after Darius, and like, he dives in, and it says, I dove in after him, and then it wastes several sentences going, and you might be thinking, wow, where did the bravery come along to do that? And it's because, you know, when you're wearing a costume like the Indiana Jones hat, like, it gives you this bravery. I'm like, I don't care. I just want to know what's happening. You don't need to stop and go through every single thought in your annoying little head. Just have the story happen. Don't rethink everything that happens 4 times. And the worst part of all, as far as I'm concerned, is that there is a good story in here. There is a good story in here. Like, just look at the pieces you have, and you could put this into a good story. So, you know what? I want to show you how I think you could fix this story. Just like last time, just by getting rid of all the extra baggage, you could make this into a scary story. And it would look something like this. So we get introduced to our main character, Arlo, and my idea is that we'd show him at the doctor, because we want to explain all of this stuff without having to go through his head and all this. No, he's at the doctor, and the doctor is explaining with his latest x-rays that his skull is starting to thin, and Arlo will explain that his bones are missing. He has 30 or 40% of his bones missing, and they seem to be all over his body, and the doctor is worried that his skull is starting to thin, so he might need to get a helmet. He might even need surgery this time, as opposed to just the braces and thing he usually uses. And so our kid's a bit worried, and the doctor wants to try something else, because their assumption is that his immune system is eating his bones or something. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is there's a bit of technobabble. He says, look, we'll try this, and if this doesn't work, then we're probably going to need to do radical surgery. We're going to have to get you in helmets and casts and things until we can fix this. So our kid does that. It goes back, and his dad's like, how was it all? And he's like, yeah, it's going pretty good. But he's actually lying, because obviously things are very bad. But he then gets in the car, and to take his mind off it, he's talking to his dad about work, because his dad is a paleontologist. They call him Dr. Fossil, and because he loves dinosaurs, he geeks out about them. And we're even going to mention that when he was younger, he used to follow his dad on digs and stuff, but since he started losing his bones, his parents have started becoming worried about him. They don't like him doing really strenuous activities, so he's had to do less and less, and he can barely even run as it is, because my plan is that he would have braces on his legs, kind of like the Forrest Gump braces, but obviously a bit more modern, and they also have crutches that he uses at home, because his legs are a bit floppy when he doesn't have his braces on when he's getting to bed and stuff. And he'd have, like, I'm thinking straps around his legs, and he'd also have things on his arms, like just bracing around to keep them stronger, because his bones in his arms are thinner, but they're not gone. But his fingers are weirdly flexible because he's missing some of his wrist bones. Like, the idea is that all over his body, like ribs, ankle bones, metatarsals, the femur, they're all thinned or missing. And so even though he used to be a really active kid when he was really young, now he just geeks out about dinosaurs. That's the thing he loves the most. And also he does have a bit of an obsession, because bones, and he's missing bones, and he likes dinosaur bones. And it's something he can relate to his father about. But in this early chapter, his dad says that he's actually a bit worried, because he's been helping his younger brother Leo to run his museum. And Leo is not as stupid as he is in the other books, but he is desperate because the museum is struggling. They've been struggling because less people are coming to museums these days. That he was using Dr. Fossil's branding, like he calls himself Mr. Fossil, to try to get people to come in and check out the museum, but they're getting less people coming, and he even got so desperate that he tried asking people to pay for tickets when they head in, but that made the people come even less, and so he's really struggling to get people to come back, especially with his Creeposaurus Rex thing. Dr. Fossil doesn't approve, because this Creeposaurus Rex fossil is clearly a chimera. It's just a mix of bones. It's not a real thing, but Leo was hoping that it at least will get some attention. And it definitely is amongst kids. All the kids think it's really cool. In fact, Arlo talks about how a friend of his, Darius, is obsessed with the Creeposaurus Rex. In fact, Darius, he's still a filmmaker, like in the early version of the story, and he wants to do like a YouTube thing, maybe like a sketch or something with the Creeposaurus Rex skeleton. And in fact, that's something that Arlo's looking forward to. That weekend, because Leo is so desperate to get people to come to the museum, he agreed to get Darius and Leo to film something in his museum at night, something that's a bit creepy with the Creeposaurus Rex, to get kids more invested. He wants, hashtag Creeposaurus Rex. He wants people to come to the museum. And I like the idea of, we'll have a scene of our kid at school, and he's talking with Darius, because they're talking about all the ideas they have for this thing they're going to film. And Darius even says, hey, why don't you get your old friend Kayla to come and do some filming with us? But Arlo says, no, we haven't been friends for ages, and besides, she's been really cold and distant with me. And in reality, he's just jealous because she's hanging out with Craig, and they seem to be dating. And Craig is a bit of a bully. And I'd have to be careful on the way I do this, but I like the idea that he doesn't like Craig because Craig does bully him in like the way he does with the other kids. But in my head, the idea is that this is actually because Craig bullies everyone, and he sees Arlo as an equal. Everyone else treats Arlo like, he's made of cotton wool. They've got to be careful around him. And so I kind of like the idea that Craig actually respects him, even though he doesn't like him. Sort of, I don't know, it's just an idea I'm playing with in my head. But what matters is, after school that day, it's Friday, they head in to the museum, and Darius is there, and Arlo's there. And unfortunately, Leo has bad news for them, which is that the Creeposaurus Rex skeleton is missing. So they go in and they see the police all around, and they're taking photos and the crime scene and all this stuff, and they're not sure what to do. And Leo's trying to figure out how on earth this could happen. And, Dr. Fossil, Arlo's dad, is not sure how this could possibly happen. And they're talking about how, like, the biggest part of the creature is its skull. And even though he's like, well, it's not really its skull, but still, the only way to get it out is be through the doors. Like, it's so heavy to carry. So there's all this, what's going on stuff around the kids. But after a while, Dr. Fossil has the police go home, and he says to the kids, well, I guess we're going home too. But Arlo says, no, we'll still stay. Well, because even though Arlo's like, well, we don't know what we're going to do. We're going to film the Creeposaurus. And I like the idea of Darius going, what are you talking about? We can't film our movie. But Arlo nudges him like, no, we'll do this. We're going to promote the museum. It needs it now more than ever. So I like the idea that Arlo insists that they stay there overnight to do their film like they were planning. And so their dad agrees and says, okay, well, as long as you don't cross the crime scene. And Leo's like, yeah, absolutely. I'd love you to film your promotional stuff. So they get there, and to me, this is half the fun, is that, they'll have sleeping bags and stuff because they were planning on filming there overnight anyway. But the idea there are these two kids in this empty museum, that's where a lot of the creepy stuff is going to come from. And so they'll start off, just having like snacks and stuff, and they'll do a little bit of filming, messing about. And Darius says, well, how about we go with like a documentary angle as opposed to the cool film sketch thing I had in mind? So he just sort of introduces, and they show the crime scene, and they go wandering around filming the creepy stuff at night. And my idea is that late that night, they'll hear someone break in, and they'll be freaking out, and they'll have to creep through to see what on earth is going on, and they'll realize that it is Kayla and Craig that have broken in. And at first they're like, what are you doing here? Were you the ones who stole the bones? And very quickly they realize that's ridiculous, but Kayla insists, no, we're just here to check it out. Yeah, we're checking out the crime scene. And Craig's like, yeah, we wanted to see it for ourselves. And so now we've got a new little group of 4 kids in here who are looking around. And so together they decide to search around to see if they can find some clues and maybe get some filming. And Darius is like all full steam ahead on this. He's like, okay, everyone get your phones out and film everything you see. I want you to go out and get as much footage as possible. And this explains why they decide to split up and spread out. And my idea is that when they split up, this is when Arlo starts seeing things like the bones moving on their own. He'll have to fight that suit of armor with the bones inside of it. And he'll be on his own this time, and he'll insist on what he saw, and everyone's like, you're making that up. He's like, no, it's real, and he tries to show them his footage, but he dropped his phone early because he freaked out because he was scared. And my idea is that this will build up, and Darius and Arlo will meet together to talk, and they'll realize that Kayla and Craig haven't really been doing any of the stuff they were hoping for, and that's when they realize that they've snuck downstairs into one of the exhibit sort of storage rooms that some museums, not everything in a museum is on display, so they'll go down there, and they're actually in this sort of little sorcerer's tomb area, which has the 2 fake gateways and the letters. And instead of it being written on there like museum, I like the idea that they have to read the placards that say the Heart Gate and the Bone Gate. And also, we'll have to have the Creeposaurus Rex going around that's sort of attacking people. And I do like throwing in the scene where he sees some of the dinosaurs and missing bones as well. But the most important thing is it will build up and build up, similar to last time. But the way this one will build up is that he'll finally confront Kayla about why she is trying to find this heart gem thing that she's putting in the heart gate, which is making it glow. And then she'll tell him that she's convinced that she caused him to be losing his bones because of this curse that's all about the sorcerer's tomb. And she'll finally admit that. I'll be like, okay, well, why don't we work together to fix this thing? So then they'll be working together, but the Creeposaurus Rex will then be following all 4 of them. And I've got the scene in my head where the Creeposaurus Rex is chasing after all of them, and they're all running, but Arlo can't run because he has issues with his legs. And so the Creeposaurus Rex will bite down on top of him and swallow him, but it's a skeleton, and so it swallowed him whole, and it gets him trapped in the rib cage, which is the prison. And then it will swallow all of his friends as well and take him to the Knight, and the Knight will take off its helmet, and he'll see like just fragments of bone of where it's a bit of a skull, almost the exact same bit of skull that's missing on his head as it's thing out. And he realizes that this is the sorcerer that is slowly stealing his bones. It needs the suit of armor because it doesn't have enough bones. It's just using those as the basis to control this suit of armor, to control them. And so then we'll get to that scene again where the idea is that Kayla says, no, we need to destroy the heart. We need to destroy it. And our main character Arlo will realize that he's the only one who can because they're trapped in this ribcage. And so he will take off his braces, and it will hurt a little bit, but he'll squeeze himself through the ribcage of this dinosaur, and he'll slowly crawl closer and closer to this heart. And then when he gets closer, he picks it up ready to smash it, and then he puts it back and he apologizes. That's when he realizes the issue is that they keep taking and taking. That's why the bone taker is taking his bones, is because they took his first. Because there is the actual sorcerer's tomb bones, he'll realize they're not in the coffin because they've been taken out for analysis. And that's the problem, is that they're stealing all of his stuff. So that's why he's stealing them back. And so then he apologizes to it, and he manages to hop. I mean, maybe he'll use something to as some sort of a makeshift arm brace thing so he can move. But I like the idea of him going over and showing him its bones and saying, here, you can have them back. I'm sorry we took all this stuff from you. We desecrated your bones, for goodness sake. So here, have them back. And I like the idea that after this, the sorcerer will collapse. And then our guy will shriek as he feels this strange thing inside of him, which is his bones coming back. Like, that's going to be a gross feeling. And, I mean, obviously this is just off the top of my head, so I don't know how you'd end it with the twist thing. The only thing I got in mind is maybe you could do a twist where it ends with Darius filming everything and he sort of takes a selfie with it, and we'll have a chapter scare at the end where it reveals that because he took a picture of their face, there's some cultures that don't like taking pictures because they think it sort of takes your soul or whatever. So maybe we'll have a chapter scare where Darius comes knocking on his door, banging in his usual way, and Isla will open the door saying, what's the problem? And we'll see Darius there, face missing because it took his face for having taken a picture of their face. That's just the chapter scare I'm thinking of, but this is basic idea. Get rid of all the guff, get rid of the extra class stuff that doesn't help at all, the Mrs. Fawcett, the extra class members, doesn't help. Just keep it down to the simple stuff, which is kid with missing bones, giant creepy dinosaur, creepy museum at night, well, in darkness. It's not actually at night, it's just the lights are off, but at night, actually, the whole thing with Kayla, I like the Heartgate and the Bone Gate, but simplifies it, and then actually have it fit within a proper Chapter Spook story length and end with a silly little twist. And yes, once again, I always say this, but I think this is better, but you may disagree. And this is one of the few occasions where I think, you know what, this is so different because it's such a different tone that I understand that. But honestly, the thing I keep feeling when I'm reading these books, more than anything else, is that Scott Charles should not write horror stories. In fact, I don't think he wants to write books. I think he should write cartoon scripts, because clearly he's got the mind for that silly sort of kooky, goofy, or referencing back, visual comedy sort of cartoon mindset. I think if you are an animation director, look this guy up because he's clearly got the chops for that. Unfortunately, I don't think he's got the ability to write scary stories because he just wants to be funny. And there's nothing wrong with being funny, but there is when you're trying to write a Chapter Spooks book. And so ultimately, I mean, honestly, I would go lower because of the whole making fun of people with digestive issues thing and the fact that some of these jokes are stupid, but I will admit a lot of that is just me, that's my bias, and so this book ultimately in the end just gets a C-. And that was looking a lot higher before I got through the halfway point, but honestly, wasting time and all the stupid things that follow just completely soured this book for me, so not very good. And again, I don't think this guy should be writing horror stories, he should be writing cartoons. So with all that being said, what can you learn from this story? Well, to me the first thing is quite clear, which is understand your weaknesses. And yeah, sure, you should understand your strengths as well, but that's not as useful when it comes to getting better at writing, because understanding your strengths just means, okay, I do that well, that's good. But when you understand your weaknesses, it means not only can you know what you can focus on if you want to improve, but it also means if it's something that you really struggle with, that you should make sure that you are writing in a way that focuses less on the bits that you're weak on. Like, I keep mentioning it in this book, but clearly our guy struggles when it comes to horror. He just tries to make things gross, or he tries to make things like, oh, it's bones, or it's blood, or it's guts, but he doesn't know how to actually make it creepy, to build up that tension. He struggles with that. And so the fact that these books focus on that kind of a fear factor is the reason why these books fail so much. And everyone struggles when it comes to writing. So for me, I recognize that some of my weaknesses, because I'm quite hyper-literal, it means that I struggle when it comes to mythology, mysticism, and fantasy. I really struggle with that kind of a mindset. I need things to make scientific, perfect sense in my head, and so I struggle with that kind of writing. I also struggle with character-driven stories, and stories that are very character-forward, so I need to put a lot of effort in to make my characters, because it's not something that comes naturally to me. I'm just like, okay, there's a thing with a quirk, but if I'm not careful, they will just sound like me. Those are both things I struggle with, and so I try not to focus on fantasy-driven stories. I try not to focus on character-driven stories because that's not something that I do well. So not only is it useful for developing the way that you create your stories so that you can focus on the things you are good at, but as with any skill, the first step of being good is recognizing that you're bad and could be better. And the second thing from this book And honestly, it's tough because the thing that keeps coming in my mind is word count. But honestly, I've already talked about that. I talked about it last time. I don't want to repeat myself. So I want to focus instead on the idea that when it comes to the different things you can do with your story, different tropes, different tools, different writing tricks, I think that it's important to know that before you learn how, you should learn why. In this book, it has, using in medias res, it has epistolary documents, like, articles and things that are shown on the page. It has an epilogue for this, and it had in the last book as well. And it has all of these facets that are thrown in, but they don't add to the story. And the reason why they don't add to the story is because it's like the writer knew that these things existed, but didn't know why they're good for a story. So, for instance, the reason why it's useful to use something epistolary, to have an actual document and show it in your story, is because it means that you can get into the main character's head because you read it as they read it, and it means you can also read, and maybe you can pick up on stuff, a bit of dramatic tension. Maybe you can understand something in that document that the character can't, or maybe it just helps you get into the headspace of the person who wrote that document. That's really useful. So when they use it here and just throw it in because they want to have an article and a dumb joke about unblockable ads, that doesn't help the story. Instead, it makes more sense for the teacher to just say, we can't go, the dinosaur bones are missing. Or having in medias res, that can be really useful. I discussed all of that in the last episode. So throwing it in there just for fun and then realizing, that doesn't work because I need to change the story, and then instead telling us that the first chapter was a lie, that's just nonsensical. That doesn't help the story at all. It makes it worse. So why would you use it in the first place? Ask yourself this question. Why do we use it? And I've already discussed it in the last one, so I won't dwell on that. But things like an epilogue. What is the use of an epilogue? Well, an epilogue is a part after the story that, in my eyes, can be ignored, but at the same time adds something onto the end of a story. This is useful if you want people to know what happens afterwards, but it doesn't help the story to end, and so you have an epilogue instead of it, so that people know, okay, the story's over, here's what happened after, but the story is over. So that's where that comes in useful, because it means that you don't have to drag the story on further than the end point just to talk about something that wasn't relevant to the plot. All of the poetic devices that you can find in stories and in books, all of them have some purpose, some meaning, some reason why they can improve a story. And knowing how to do them, especially things like this where it's formatting and things like that, that's nowhere near as important as understanding why people would use these tools, because in the case of this book, by just throwing them in without using them properly, it means that it actually takes away from the story. Literally, it's a case of less is more, because even though it's got more in it than a regular book, the book is lesser because of it. So that was CreepTown number 2, The Bone Taker. A very disappointing book, just like its predecessor, and I still want to reiterate, please, get this man into cartoons so that he can actually show what he's really good at, because I don't want to go saying that this independent author is a bad author. I just don't think he's a good horror author, but he still has some interesting writing. Some of the jokes would be funny to some other people, not myself, but I have a very particular sense of humor that's very dry and broken. And even though I've been let down twice now, I am actually still looking forward to the next one for 2 reasons. The first being that it actually is the shortest book in the trilogy, now that I know that I'm not mixing up with the first one. And the second reason, well, I'm going to explain that when we get to our next episode, the last episode of this first season of Chapter Spooks. But hey, if you thought this was scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time.